Now, here's another thing we know about teachers in the classroom. For learning to occur in the classroom, the teacher must have control and discipline. We also know that control and discipline will not occur in the classroom unless the teacher is supported by the principal and the superintendent and the school board. I've heard far too many stories as I've toured the state for the last 12 months talking to teachers about incidences where they tried to discipline a student, and because the parent complained to the school board or the superintendent, that discipline was overturned. Or teachers who sent somebody to the principal for discipline, and 5 minutes later, the student was back in the classroom, and there was no consequences, no punishment. And about the 4th or 5th time, the teacher said, "To heck with it, I'll just do the best I can." Or the principals have actually said, "Oh, my hands are tied. Just do the best you can." That's not going to work. We need to have a system that allows teachers to maintain discipline in the classroom. For that reason, I intend to work with the General Assembly to pass the Teacher Protection Act so that teachers are not intimidated by the threat of frivolous lawsuits from parents or others. There's a dictum in education that everybody believes in discipline in the classroom except for their own children. And I've experienced that with helicopter parents calling me as the president of Newberry College to complain about some teacher who was too tough on their child or who was unfair, or some coach who didn't play their kids enough and obviously has it out for my daughter because she's a better basketball player than that coach has her. And, you know, you just have to listen and say, you know, every time I investigate it, it's rarely the teacher's fault or the coach's. Now, we need to reward achievement. I think that's vitally important. It incentivizes folks, and frankly, it disincentivizes those who can't achieve. And I know everybody in this room is high achievers. Principals and teachers must be fairly evaluated and appropriately rewarded based on value added whenever possible. Value added is how much did the student know when they came into the classroom, and how much did the student know a year later. Now, people are concerned that, you know, you can't compare a teacher of talent and gifted with special needs kids. And you know what? You're absolutely right. But we can compare like students and like classes. So I can say, and this is mathematics, and I don't want to bore you, it's called multiple regression analysis and analysis of variance and covariance. But mathematically, we can say, given the poverty level in your class, given the demographics of your class, and given the start point of those students, here's what the average teacher will do. Here's what the above average teacher will do, and here's what the below average teacher will do. Now, clearly, in some areas, you can't measure pre and post of what the student knows. I mean, how do you measure that in art or music class? So other factors also have to be included in evaluating teachers. These would include peer evaluations. For example, you know who the good teachers are in your school. Other things that might be important would be principal evaluations. They have a pretty good idea. Actually, there's some interesting research coming out of the Teach for America folks that show that students recognize good teaching when they see it. And it's not popularity. But if the students reply yes to the following, we get down to work right away in my class. That's probably a highly effective teacher. If the students respond yes to the following question, my teacher explains things many different ways, then you've probably got a highly effective teacher. Now, is there any correlation between I really like my teacher? No. But there are indicators, and we can measure that. The Department of Education has been tasked by our General Assembly in pending a bill and legislation to develop a scheme for teacher compensation that takes into effect measures of performance. And so we are right now surveying all of the schemes that are being used across the country. And interestingly, a lot of districts and states have gone to pay-for-performance schemes for teachers. And again, we're going to steal all their good ideas. In fact, I talked to Secretary Arnie Duncan, and he referred me to some of the schools and districts that have effective pay-for-performance schemes. And obviously, not only do we need to reward our best teachers better, but we need to take care of the ineffective teachers. I'm going to bore you with one more story. Some of you may have heard this. In Vietnam, I had a Commanding General, Bill Depew, who got the reputation as a relief artist, somebody relieving guys at command. Colonel, pack your bags. Sergeant Major, get on the helicopter. Major, you're out of here. And I was with him when one of my friends said, General Depew, what are your criteria for relieving an officer of his command? And parenthetically, you know, you can't go to work for another army. And General Depew said, you know, if I sense that through a lack of compassion, a lack of courage, or a lack of competence, that officer unnecessarily jeopardizes the lives of his soldiers, then that officer must be replaced. For he can find a new job. Those soldiers will never find a new life. You only have one opportunity to go through third grade as an 8-year-old. And if you have a poor teacher 2 or 3 years in a row, it's unlikely that you will ever catch up unless there are extraordinary circumstances. We cannot sacrifice the future of our children to provide job security for ineffective adults. Now, if you're going to hold people accountable, and this is in any field, you must give them the authority to influence outcomes. Otherwise, they're not responsible for results. Superintendents must have the ability to hire, evaluate, and fire principals. And far too often, school boards get involved in that process. They don't know they don't have the background to do it. Principals must have the authority to hire and fire teachers and to administer other programs within the schools. Otherwise, they can't be held accountable for the results. And teachers must have the authority to maintain discipline in their classrooms and award grades in accordance with performance. And far too often I've heard stories of teachers who don't have the authority to do either of those. Now, there are causes for optimism in the whole education environment. Nationwide, there is a groundswell of support for reform of what many have called an agrarian-based model of education that's existed in our country for over 100 years, that has summers off because why? That was the harvest and planting time. We also know that technology is opening up opportunities to tailor instruction and learning strategies to individual learning styles and needs and timelines. Education reform is not a partisan agenda. This is the only area I know of where Al Sharpton and Newt Gingrich are literally walking arm in arm, being led by Arnie Duncan, our Superintendent of Education. Other states and districts across the country, Florida, Indiana, Louisiana, Arizona, Washington, D.C., and New York City have embraced these kinds of reforms that I've talked about or suggested, with significant improvements in results in student learning and student success.